Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, January 20th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 225 days, the game against Michigan in 309 days. And while we're setting our calendars for the 2023 football season, go ahead and pencil in April 15th for the 2023 Ohio State spring game. If you are just can't wait to get there, tickets are on sale February 10th, so you can add that to your countdown as well every morning. But we now have the official Ohio State spring game date, April 15th. So set your April plans accordingly. We are going to be looking at maybe what things might look like going into the spring, at least for Ohio State. We're going to be taking a look at the two deeps over the next 2 days. We're going to start on offense, and we're going to start with Tony Gerdeman of Buckeye Huddle. He went through and bravely took on the work of trying to put these together. I had tried to do that as well earlier in the week. We came up with sort of similar answers. But, Tony, this feels like a year where, especially on the offensive line, one change could have a ton of cascading effects where it's like we could be exactly right on this, or if one thing changes, we could be wrong on 4 positions on the offensive line.
Yeah, the world's largest butterfly effect basically depends on one guy, a left tackle, a center, whatever, just is going to alter everything that goes on with the offensive line. And that's part of the strength of having a versatile group, but also maybe part of the weakness of not having definitive positions. And it's a glass half full, glass half empty type of thing of how you want to look at it. It's great to have versatile guys who can move somewhere like, well, we need you at right guard. Okay, I can do that. Or we need you at center. I can do that. But I think the decision by Luke Whippler to leave for the NFL had to catch them off guard in some manner. I think everybody knew as a second-year guy, he's going to have a decision, but a second-year starter, he's going to have a decision, but you don't. I did not expect him to leave, and so if I didn't expect it, how could anybody else?
Yeah, exactly. Who could be more plugged in than you? I can't imagine anyone. So. But we'll get to the offensive line in a minute and, the potential impact of a butterfly flapping its wings at Louisiana Monroe and how it could impact everything across the offensive line. But Tony, I think we are contractually obligated to start with the quarterbacks. So let's start with the quarterbacks. Again, Ohio State has added a transfer quarterback, Tristan Gebbia from Oregon State. But this feels like one where the two deep is pretty cut and dried, at least in terms of which two names are there. And then the real question is, what order are those names in?
Yeah, the two names are Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. Devin Brown, the true freshman this past year, I don't believe threw a pass. Kyle McCord obviously getting in some time, played 7 or 8 games, threw some passes in most of those games. I think right now you slot in Kyle McCord without an or. I put no or on him. I just have it Kyle McCord and then Devin Brown as the 2. But the thing about it is this spring, they're going to have an opportunity to compete for the job. Like, Devin Brown is not competing to be the backup. He is competing to be the starter. Kyle McCord is competing to be the starter. So the fact that I have a 1 and a 2 here, it's because of the experience of both guys. The fact that Kyle McCord has started a game, but this is absolutely going to be an open competition that either guy can win. But right now I've got McCord number 1.
And that's a reasonable thing. And you will find people who will very definitively tell you that it is definitely going to be Devin Brown or it's definitely going to be Kyle McCord. This is an open competition. I think just based on the seniority, you do kind of have to give a little bit of a nod to McCord right now. But this is one where neither outcome would really surprise me in terms of who's taken that first snap against Indiana in September. This is another one where, boy, Tony, running back. There are 5 running backs back with experience, and boy, that feels like a lot of running backs to have back with experience. And this is one where even among those 5, I think you could make a decent argument for, I think 1 and 2 are pretty clear cut. And then after that, it's a little more jumbled in terms of who you want to have in what order. But 1 and 2, I think you've got the correct 2 and you have the correct order of them in terms of there's not really a 2. It's just 1 and also 1 here.
Yeah, and that's why I went with a 2 deep instead of a depth chart. It just makes things easier to stop at 2 with all of the jumbles that you can do. But it's Mayan Williams and it's Travion Henderson. And I have it Mayan Williams or Travion Henderson. And to let you know, Tom, the seriousness that I take this with, initially I had it Travion Henderson or Mayan Williams. And it's like, no. We're going to go ahead and put Mayan Williams first as the 1A to the 1B. But it's also the fact that it sounds like both guys are coming back. And that's not something that I would have, as I wrote on a message board when I keep updating it. I think this is version 6.1 that I released on Thursday. But I would have lost the bet. I would have said they'll get one of them back, or or maybe none. I think getting them both back was something that it just seemed it was a big ask, and Tony Alford has apparently asked, and they have answered, and so having those two guys, it starts there, and I still wonder what happens with Dallin Hayden after getting 100 carries as a true freshman to then take a step back. Evan Pryor coming in. So many moving parts, a ton of weapons, and you still have Xavier Johnson waiting in the wings to do whatever you need.
Yeah, and Chip Trainum is in there too. I mean, are we going to characterize Xavier Johnson as running back, as a wide receiver? That's the whole separate conversation. But yeah, it feels questionable to me that they're going to have all 5 or all 6 of those guys on the roster when the season actually starts. There is another transfer portal window coming out of the spring. And those are all, good, capable running backs or better. And you're not going to be able to get 5 or 6 guys, 100 carries each. That's not where you're going to have some very upset wide receivers if you do. So it feels like that's probably going to be something where someone is going to leave after the spring just as a pure numbers game. But yeah, to have all of those guys back now, and especially to have Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson back right now, that is quite a 1-2 punch for them to have at the top of that list. And then a lot of talented guys behind them. And speaking of 1-2 punches, this is really just a 1 punch, but it's really like a kind of a 1-2-3-4 punch, because we're moving to the X receiver position. Tony very controversially has put Marvin Harrison at the top of the list here. Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, I guess he's okay. Behind him, it's a little more of an open competition. You've got 3 different guys, none of whom have really done, I don't think any of them have caught passes. Maybe Kojo Antwi caught a pass last year, but you have a very, very, very proven starter and then a lot of question marks behind him.
Yeah, and it's all question marks at this point, especially projecting the 3 receiver positions. So I have it Marvin Harrison as 1. I am projecting him I can project it now, I can announce it now. I am projecting him to win a starting spot next season for the Buckeyes. And then I have it Noah Rogers, incoming freshman, or Carnell Tate, incoming freshman, or Kojo Antwi, redshirt freshman. And to be honest, it could be any number of other guys as well. I remember, just thinking back to all of the discussions we've done about the X receiver in the past, and I don't believe we ever put Jameson Williams there. He started there. Garrett Wilson was another one. Is he going to be in the slot? Is he going to be at Z? Ends up starting his career as an X. And so, neither of those guys you would think of as X receivers, the bigger chain movers. And of course, the way Marvin Harrison produces, he's not necessarily an X either in that regard. He produces more than just those sort of things. But you look at who else is like him. And I think Carnell Tate to me reminds me of Michael Thomas. Noah Rogers is another 6'2" guy, bigger like that. Kojo Antwi. The entire 2021-22 signing class of receivers they're all like 6 foot. So you got to put them somewhere. But that's where I have it now. But this is just, I've got to put people here. And so that's really what that is. Although I would not be surprised to see Noah Rogers or Carnell Tate solidify themselves there, especially since they are coming in early and will be in the spring.
And then across the other outside receiver position, Z, this one feels like the cleanest, easiest. These are going to be the top 2 guys. It's always, as always, subject to change depending on, hey, there's a lot of other talented wide receivers there and guys may work themselves into that too deep. But Julian Fleming and Jaden Ballard at the Z, that feels like it would be, someone would really have to make a move to break into that, I think, too deep.
Yeah, and that's basically what it was this year. However, you'd see Emeka playing the Z as well instead when Fleming would go to the bench or whatever. So Jaden Ballard didn't really get to play as much as we thought he would. Next year, perhaps he was, but this too seems pretty cut and dry. I do wonder if there is going to be some, and maybe this involves what happens next to the slot. If they really try to go to a true 6-man rotation, can you put Julian Fleming at X with Marvin Harrison and maybe have Emeka and Jaden Ballard at the Z? And then you've got some young guys at the H in the slot to, have some fun with. But that's such an important position. I don't know that you just completely turn it over to a bunch of young guys yet. But Fleming and Ballard seems like a pretty easy 1-2 guess there at Z.
And at the slot, it feels like, again, as you said, they do move Emeka Egbuka around some, but he feels like he is going to be the starter at H, the slot position. And then you've got Xavier Johnson there behind him. Technically, we haven't officially seen Xavier Johnson say the exact sentence, "I am coming back to Ohio State for the 2023 football season." But everything we have seen has basically said that. So I think that's a reasonable, he is a reasonable person to have behind Egbuka in the slot.
Yeah, and I think that's fits to what we saw this past year. But I also think you got young guys, Caleb Brown, Brandon Ennis. Brandon Ennis not being in for the spring, I think holds him back a little bit, but I think he's so talented that I think it'll be difficult to keep him from seeing the field. I'd be surprised if he redshirts, basically. He should get more than his 4 games. But I think they've got some really talented guys there, and it'll be interesting to watch if they can push Emeka maybe to more of the outside receiver type. But again, that position is so vital. That slot position is so vital. You want somebody who is able to handle it. But we saw them turn it over to Jackson Smith-Njigba as a true sophomore as well. So, and Garrett Wilson as well. So if you've got the talent, they'll give it to a young guy. But with Emeka being a returning 1,000-yard receiver, I think this makes the most sense right now for him and Xavier Johnson. Again, like you said, he's not come out and said it. The Ohio State football Twitter account hinted at it. But it's like, we don't need to go off on these rants about the announcements, but come on, just make the announcement public and stop being so cryptic with it. Don't be don't give us a saying. Just say, hey, all you need to do what Michael Jordan said. I'm back. That's all.
It's not quite as bad as new Nebraska head coach Matt Rule, who will just tweet out a series of 6 emojis, like he's some kind of Zodiac killer kind of thing. It's like, well, what does that mean? The duck and the water fountain and the all right, whatever. Just say I'm going here, or we got a commitment. It will be fine. Next one. This is a little more clear cut. If you like things clear cut, Tony, I think I feel pretty confident that Cade Stover is in fact going to be the starter at tight end after coming back for another year. And then there's probably 2 guys who are pretty clear 2A and 2B behind him.
Yeah, Tom, I can confirm your suspicions about Cade Stover probably being the starting tight end next year since he did so well this year. And I know I can hear people saying, yeah, but what about his blocking? You know what you do over the course of time? You get better at stuff. And I think he'll get better as a blocker. Already had more catches as a tight end than anybody since Ricky Dudley in 1995, I believe, for Ohio State. So he's the number one. Then all of the stuff that we're hearing about Joe Royer before camp and during camp and before the season, I would expect to start hearing that again. So I have him and or G. Scott as the number 2. And I think they can do some different things. But I would expect to start hearing Joe Royer's name more and more and more. And we saw him a little bit against Georgia. Had some good snaps in there, had a nice diving catch. But obviously, losing Mitch Rossi, they need to figure that out a little bit better. So I think those 3 are your easy picks for the number 2, as you said, the top 2.
All right, we're 14 minutes in the show, and we're just now getting to the offensive line, which we said off the top. This is the complicated part of the conversation. So enjoy the longest morning show in the history of the morning show. Let's start at left tackle. And this is one where they could bring in a transfer left tackle after the spring and change 4 other positions on this offensive line. So let's start with where things maybe are right now. You've got Donovan Jackson starting at left tackle with Zen Michalski behind him. Is could Zen Mahalski win this starting job and move Donovan Jackson to left guard and then, slide a whole bunch of other guys around the line? Absolutely. But it feels like, based on the way they were talking about Donovan Jackson, they're certainly going to give him a look at left tackle, if nothing else, this spring.
Yeah, Kevin Wilson talked about that last year. Josh, other people did as well. He was the second left tackle in after Paris Johnson went out of the spring game last year. I think he only played a series there, but that gives you an idea. So I think right now, I think they would prefer to have Zen Mahalski win it. They would love for Zen Mahalski to win that job and step up and be is he a second or third year guy at this point, a redshirt sophomore, to come in, win that job, allow them to keep Donovan Jackson at his all Big Ten left guard spot. But that left tackle spot is so important, and I think they all believe he has the feet and he has the length. He's only 6'4", but so is Jamarco Jones. I don't think that's the huge issue that it's not a hang up. Because as long as he's got the arms and he's got the feet, they can work with the rest, and he has that. So I have it, Donovan Jackson as the starter, Zen Mahalski as the backup. I think you'll see them battle all spring. And actually, I can't say that because Donovan Jackson may never take a snap at left tackle, but just based on the way they were talking last year and the fact that there is no proven left tackle there, I just think that's where he ends up. Starts out.
Yeah, it's definitely where he starts out, probably, and then where he ends up, well, it could be left tackle, it could be left guard. If he does end up at left tackle, well, that leaves left guard as an open position, and the next man up in the guard rotation last year was Enoch Vamahi, so you've got him as a starter there. And Tony, I have put together graphics for all of these, and I had to really shrink the font size to get all the other potential, second string left guard candidates in there, because boy, there's a lot of them. Tigger Shabola, or Vic Cutler, who just transferred from Louisiana Monroe, or Ben Chrisman, or Carson Hinsman, or Luke Montgomery, or Austin Sierreveld, or Jacob James. And Tony, I feel like you probably have left out a couple potential candidates there, which is really incomplete work on your part.
That's my fault. I was running out of ink on the internet. But I mean, that's just, it's or the entire offensive line roster, basically, because, and initially when, I initially had Enoch Vamahi, maybe a right guard with Matt Jones at center. We'll get to that. But like, I had Tigger Shabola as my initial starter the first time I did this. And it's based on the fact that he played more than any other freshman, and you need bodies. And so like, he was my day one, my version 1.0 starter at left guard. But that's just, I guess, based on the numbers of snaps that he played this past year. And, that doesn't mean he's ahead of anybody after spring or into camp. But I think right now, as educated as we can guess, Enoch Vamahi, and then everybody else, including Tigger Shabola.
And Enoch Vamahi being at left guard as the potential starter there is dependent on who's playing center and also who's playing right guard, as you mentioned, because Matt Jones could be either of those. Right now, you do not have Matt Jones. Right now, you have Vic Cutler, who is the guy who transferred from Louisiana Monroe. You got Jacob James, who has been on the depth chart there at center in previous years. Toby Wilson, also kind of in that mix as well at center. So we got, kind of four different names at center that you could sort of potentially see, unless they bring in another transfer, in which case there are 47 different potential names. But as of right now, let's keep it just not even only just to those four that we talked about, but to the two, Vic Cutler and Jacob James. But this feels like, not only one of the more uncertain, but the one where the floor might be the lowest, because there's not a proven answer there, really.
Yeah, and let's keep in mind, Vic Cutler, coming from Louisiana Monroe, started every game at left tackle last year. Has started a handful of games at center in the past, coming to Ohio State to give a go at that center position. Jacob James has been the backup for a year or two, but he's maybe been the backup or listed as the number two. But if something would have happened to Luke Whippler, for a length of time, it would have been Matt Jones moving over. it would not have necessarily been Jacob James stepping in for 3 games. They would have made that adjustment. And so is this a sign that Jacob James is only ever going to be the number 2? Can he ever start at Ohio State? And really, Vic Cutler, what proof do we have that he can start at Ohio State at this point? And he's got a bunch of starts under his belt at Louisiana Monroe, and that's great. But this is a different world. And so this spring is going to be, I don't even know what the spring is going to look like for these guys. And Vic Cutler probably not even here for the spring. So Jacob James and Toby Wilson as your guys in the spring, battling it out and then waiting to rebattle it out in the fall. And I still don't think Ohio State is necessarily done with the offensive line in the portal. But we'll go with Vic Cutler and Jacob James right now because that's all we know.
Exactly. And, you know, when we talk about this being a potentially a low floor spot, if they had 7 guys last year who they had kind of in that circle of trust, who they really trusted to play in those really crucial moments, none of those guys other than Matt Jones are in this conversation. And Matt Jones, unfortunately for Ohio State, can only play one offensive line position at a time. So, you know, you're either going to have a real question mark at right guard or a real question mark at center. Because unless you solve the left tackle spot, and if you solve the left tackle spot, well, then that solves a lot of those other internal spots. So, as we said, you know, you really do get the butterfly effect here. Right guard, for now it's Matt Jones, and then you basically have the phone book again behind him in terms of who is going to show up after Matt Jones. You know, if Matt Jones is the starting right guard, who is the second guy in at right guard, and much like left guard, it's going to be someone. But the list is long and full of a lot of question marks.
And I know they want to start Luke Montgomery out at tackle, but if he's the best guy, you know, could we see him at guard? I know a lot of people project him on the interior. You look at the other young guys, the redshirt freshmen, the redshirt sophomores, who really haven't done anything to this point. I wonder how far ahead those guys are of this incoming class, of this 2022 class, the 2023 class, rather, and how quickly those guys can jump up and make a move, not unlike the receiver class, where you got some talented freshmen who might overtake some of these guys who have been around for a while and who have not yet done it. But right guard, Matt Jones, everybody else at this point, unless we hear word that he's okay with playing center.
Yeah, and, you know, I'm sure he would play center if they needed him to. I'm guessing he would prefer to play right guard just to continue to bolster his, his positional resume at that spot heading into the NFL a year from now. But yeah, if they need him at center, and they might, then that opens up the right guard position to one of about 17 potential candidates. Right tackle, as we said earlier. This feels like almost one of the surest things on the offensive line, and that's Josh Fryer is going to start at right tackle. I say that, and then he's going to end up as the starting tight end for some reason this year. But so far this one looks fairly clean. Josh Fryer number 1, and George Fitzpatrick number 2. He's someone who you never expect a guy to come in and start from day one on the offensive line or be ready to contribute from day one on the offensive line. It's more of a developmental position. But he's someone who you've heard enough positive things about George Fitzpatrick that it feels like as the backup right tackle year 2, that sort of feels like that's probably sort of on track for him.
It would be nice if he would eventually lose his black stripe. I believe he's still holding on to that. But, just based on what we've seen, I've liked him. And again, this could be, they honestly don't have many tackles on the roster. So there's a little bit of a process of elimination here. So I went there. And again, as we've said before and also said on Buckeye Weekly, if Josh Fryer is your best tackle, why isn't he your left tackle? And, some guys are made to be right tackles, and that's where they should be. But when you're deciding between a guy who has never played and your left guard, should you also consider maybe your right tackle? But is that right tackle better suited at a guard himself? And so it's a bit of a mess, but I'm sure, Tom, it'll end up just fine.
The good news is they have a lot of people to throw at. They throw out the issue, and the other good news is if they come out of spring unsure of who they're going to throw at the issue, there are lots of other names that could end up in the transfer portal. And as you have said before, if Ohio State puts the word out on the street that they might be in the market for another tackle or another guard or another center, that may be something that spurs some action on other campuses of guys potentially interested in coming in and doing the Jonah Jackson thing and coming in and getting to play for a championship and getting to get drafted, get developed, and get drafted a year from then. So yeah, we'll see. There's a lot of potential changes here. As Tony said, he put out his latest version of this on Thursday morning. The version before that was on Wednesday night, before we knew for sure that Vic Cutler was coming in and planning to start his first stop being at center. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes between now and the end of spring, and then the end of spring, and probably the start of the season. So a great place to track all of it is at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony has kind of had an ongoing thread on our board on a projected two deep as things change and guys leave and guys come in, and you sort of hear new things about who may be slotting in where, and hey, they may like this guy more here than there, and all of that kind of stuff. So a great place to track all of it is as a member at BuckeyeHuddle.com on our huddle board. We have all of that. We have this is also going to be a big recruiting weekend, big junior recruiting weekend. Alex Gleitman has been following that very closely on the huddle board as well. We'll probably have Alex on the show in a day or two to talk about that, and also have Mark Givler and Ross Fulton and Justin Whitlatch and Devin Radcliffe and all sorts of guys covering Kevin Moon, Tony and I covering the team, all sorts of great coverage from every possible angle at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.